Usually when you hear about privacy, you hear about the law and all of the things you must comply with. And I'm hoping today, we'll cover a little bit of that, but I'd like to hopefully today share with you a little different perspective of privacy as we go through this. And of course, we'll go through the law and some practical examples in our backyard as well. The starting point here, I'm Steve Curler. I am here online with my business partner, Brad Kelso.
Hello.
Brad and I are the co-founders of Provagio. We started the business about 2.5, 3 years ago when CCPA started to sort of come to the surface. We are a data privacy solutions and consulting firm. We help companies to implement data privacy solutions. What we found very quickly is that as we were doing this, people didn't really understand privacy. And I think many people still don't understand what privacy is. They confuse it with cybersecurity, they confuse it with other things. And they're all very close cousins, but there's still confusion. So what we did is we created a community service organization in Orange County called Privacy OC. And we wanted basically to create a place where business owners and business people could get together to share ideas, learn about this new law coming out, and share experiences. And that's what Privacy OC was. About 3-4 months after launching it, without really much sponsorship, we had about 70 or 80 members. And we said, well, wow, this thing has just taken off. And we decided, Brad, we should probably do an event. We've met so many good people, let's do an event. And so every January 28th is International Privacy Day. We ran an event in Tustin that had about 160 attendees. We did 38 speakers across 3 tracks. We basically ran a conference there. It was hugely successful. And our membership went into well over, approaching 150, 200 by the end of the event. Of course, that was probably one of the very last events that happened before COVID hit. All of the wind came out of our sails. People were refocused on other things about 5 weeks later. And now we got into a whole new world. But Privacy OC has stayed alive. We do online webinars rather than in person. The membership has now grown to over 600 people, and that's pretty much organic growth. It's now nationwide and in fact, even international. We've had prior events here. We've had people dialing in from Portugal and India and Spain and you name it, all around the world. So the privacy topic was very, very hot. So that's a little bit about us. We're co-founders. I keep telling Brad, we really started 2 businesses at once. One is a labor of love we don't make money on. It's a pay forward thing. And the other one is the business that we hopefully someday will make money on. So that's it's kind of where we're at. The agenda today, I want to talk about 4 really things. Brad and I are going to talk about what does data privacy mean to you, right? And why you should care about it. We want to talk a little bit about this value of data. Is it the new oil and what's really happening with it? And it's kind of out of control. And what's happened is there's been some laws enacted, some in California, some globally. We'll talk about that. And so we'll talk about the legal response to this growing trend on privacy. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about how businesses and consumers are responding to data privacy. So hopefully, you'll find this engaging, and I'm going to start really from a very different perspective here to begin with. So let's start with what does privacy mean to you and why should you care? First of all, there's this whole principle that privacy really is about your freedom. And I'm going to try to give you some examples here. It's a fundamental piece of our human being to want to express ourselves, to be able to assemble with whoever we want and not be judged, to associate with groups that we choose, right? And as soon as we start having our privacy invaded, you start to become, just as humans, you start to change your behavior, right? Imagine if you're, you think you're home alone, right? You got the radio on, you're dancing to a tune and you're jibbing it up in the kitchen and having a great old time, right? And then all of a sudden you turn around and you realize that there's 5 family members or neighbors that snuck in and watched you. And what's the first thing you do? You say, oh my gosh, no, you saw me, and you kind of get embarrassed to move, right? How many of you are comfortable singing in the shower, but not outside of the shower, right? Well, as soon as you're observed, as somebody sees you, you change your behavior. And that's kind of the nature of privacy. Privacy is something that's innately in us, something we value, and we behave differently when we're being observed, right? Good example of this was found way back in the 18th century. There was a guy named Jeremy Beltham. And Jeremy Beltham came up with this concept of the panopticon. And it was basically what a panopticon is. It's a building that is sort of round shaped, and in the center is a tower. And what he said is, we could be a lot more efficient if we have a tower in the middle and we build our prison around it, or our school, or our hospital. Because I can put some observers in that tower, be it a guard or a schoolmaster or whatever, and I can look into all of the cells or classrooms, and I don't need to have anybody there. In fact, people's behavior will change because they think they might be observed, right? In fact, sometimes they didn't even bother putting a guard in the tower because the prisoners that were in the cells were like, I might be watched. I'm not sure if he's there or not, but I'd better be on my best behavior, right? So the whole idea of observing people's behavior and knowing their day-to-day business is a way, if you know that, you basically control behavior, right? And this concept's not old. It's been around for a long time. In fact, if you look at major regimes, especially the totalitarian ones, the way that they control the population is by knowing everything about them, right? You take a look at Stalin, you look at Hitler, you look at communist China, you look at North Korea, right? They didn't have the internet, but what they did know, and I know this from experience of relatives that lived in Europe at the time, they knew where you went to school, where you got promoted, where you got a job, how much you made, what church you went to, what neighbors you spoke with, et cetera, et cetera. And if you were speaking with the wrong neighbors, guess what? You might not get that promotion, or you might not get that raise, right? That was sort of the way the society, what was. It was controlled that way. And I'm not trying to make this political. That's not where I'm going. But the point is that it does play into it. And this is a way of controlling people. I have given this talk, and I have literally had grown-ups in the crowd burst into tears and say, I just left that, okay? You look at, when this pandemic broke out, there was a doctor in China who discovered that he saw this odd virus, called his buddy in the university, and 2 weeks later, he's dead, right? They say he died of COVID. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't, right? Maybe he said something he shouldn't have said. We'll never know. But these sorts of things are real things that are happening today. I won't belabor this, but that's kind of why privacy starts getting important. Privacy is a human right. And people will say, well, I'm a good person. I have nothing to hide, right? Well, we all have something to hide when you get right down to it, right? And if you don't believe me, I'll ask every one of you to hand over all of your passwords to all of your accounts and just freely give them to me, right? And the reality is you probably would hesitate on that because you probably got something I'd prefer I don't see. Europe has recognized this particularly after the Second World War. So after these totalitarian regimes kind of dissolved, as the European governments formed and the EU formed and so on, they built into their constitution that privacy is a human right. It's just like our right for freedom of speech. Privacy is a human right in Europe. And it's very, very much treasured because it wasn't that long ago that our grandparents' generation lived under some of those conditions. And so it's no surprise that the first major privacy laws started in Europe. That's why GDPR started there. I used to live in Europe, and I know that if you pulled out a credit card, you held on to it, and you put it into the credit card machine that the waiter brought over, you certainly wouldn't hand it and go in the back room. Or if you asked one of my relatives there to produce a driver's license, you'd get 1,000,001 questions before they were comfortable handing that over. We're a very different culture here, but that's because the awareness around privacy in Europe is strong. It's built into the government. They've now built laws around it, and those laws and that culture change is beginning to take over the world, including coming into the US. So it's a trend that's coming. And privacy is a personal choice, right? Everybody's different. That's the challenge with it. What you consider to be private for you may not be private to somebody else. So really, you want to have some control over what you keep private and what you don't, right? And so that's another fundamental principle in the talk here. And this all has implications. And Brad, I'm going to let you talk for a minute on the long-term impact that this is having on our kids.
Yeah, so before we talk about kids, let's talk about a quick choice. How many of you adopted a Gmail account for the purpose of reducing your email cost. I don't know if mid 90s, most of us were paying 20, 30 bucks for email. And I know I joined Google, have a Gmail account, one of the early adopters, really to just save money. Wasn't thinking too much about the trade. So it was a choice at the time, and I really wasn't thinking about the trade at the time. Well, let's talk about your kids, or our kids. Between Steve and I, we have 7. And they're all millennials. And they have all grown up in a generation where they get all this free stuff, apps and things. They're in social media, photos, text, shopping, communications, chat, memes, entertainment news, streaming news. It all goes on and on. In essence, unlike us, they grew up with technology adoption as water, and they have contributed their data freely and really without thinking about it. And so their choices are sort of automated. The problem is the businesses surrounding are increasingly creating a digital identity that's different than Brad Kelso. The digital identity is everything that Brad may or may not have done in his digital footprint, his digital behaviors. And so today, this footprint is really pretty limited to what you're doing with people when you're in their digital and virtual environment. But here's the news. Over the next 10 years, that digital ID, your personal psychographic, will mature and directly influence what you're able to do in the real world. So things are going to go from pseudo to real pretty darn soon, and your kids don't know the difference. Many of us are baby boomers or something younger or slightly older than that. We kind of know the difference. We're just not as hung up on technology, certainly not on apps, but it's a really interesting consideration. I don't know how many of you saw 2 days ago, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal talking about JP Morgan Chase, who is working to potentially share the data they have about your checking behavior. It's anonymized data, they say, and Steve will talk a little bit about de-anonymized behavior, but they know when you get paid, they know what you pay when you pay, they know how late you pay, they know who you pay. They have a lot of data that they've aggregated, and the Federal Reserve uses them to test interest rates, but other people are now tapping that information. And so let's talk about the next little problem. So all good, we have to be aware of our digital signature, our digital persona. But the longer term impact, especially to teens, let's think about behind the millennials. If to millennials, the technology and data is water, to teens is nothing. Teens are way too comfortable sharing data. And the downside, both politically and socially, is a lot of depression, anxiety, bullying, feeling inadequate. And we've all understood this, right? Some of you may even have teens or teen grandchildren. So there's some long-term challenges here in terms of what we do with data, how we use data, and take the bottom line, taking back control, both culturally and through awareness of the data trade, which we're going to cover a little bit more. But I think there's some pretty provocative thought talking about what you do with your data, how it's being used by others kind of freely. Steve?
Yeah, and Brad, just to add to that, I don't know if you're watching the press, but Facebook has internal studies that demonstrate that their platform is harming teens, right? And that's recently been brought out into light in the press. So this isn't made up. It's even groups like Facebook have identified this and internally, and those leaked documents are now out. So this is very real, right? Your privacy really does impact you and impacts future generations very much. So let's talk about your data. It's been borrowed, used, stolen, and sold. And we're going to cover all of those pieces a little bit. Let's talk how. So first of all, we all love data. Everybody in business wants to have as much data about their customers as they possibly can get, right? And the problem is as Brad said, you signed up for that free Gmail account and you handed it over, never thought about it, right? You never read the privacy statement. You never read that, when you load a picture, a photo up into Facebook, you're giving them a perpetual license for every image that went in there, right? Nobody ever thought about asking about that. And this goes on and on. It's very simple. Like, so you say, hey, it'd be really cool to build a family tree. So let me go into ancestry.com and put all my stuff in there. And oh, by the way, I can now get my DNA loaded in there too and find lost relatives. How cool is that, right? Well, they've got to deal with law enforcement. Law enforcement will share that data. They use it to hunt down criminals. And there's many, many cases in the press where that happens. And you say, hey, that's great. I love law enforcement. Wonderful, right? What happens when that's used for other purposes and you have no control over it, right? You've got apps, if you've ever seen, and I'm not picking on State Farm here, they all do it, but it makes me laugh. They say they've got the Safe Driver app, right? Get our app and you'll be a safer driver, right? But what they're really tracking is how fast you accelerate, how hard you brake, what neighborhoods you've been in, how much you weigh. All these factors are brought into the app. And it's, yes, you can reduce your risk and maybe your rates, right? But really, they're capturing so much information that they're using for other purposes. And I've been giving this talk now for about 2 years, and it's interesting. Just about 2 weeks ago in the paper, State Farm announced that all this information they're capturing in their app, and also, by the way, in the electronics in new cars, they're looking to share it with state governments so they can start charging you a mileage tax. Well, wait a minute. You never told me that on that ad on TV that that's what you're using my data for, right? Think about going on your TV and, Samsung was shipping smart TVs to people's houses with the microphone and with the camera activated. Can you imagine you're sitting on the couch on a Friday night with your date and they're recording you? Right now, eventually they got caught and they pulled it off the market and changed it, but you don't really know. In fact, I recently was out shopping for some of these products here, in the Shield product, Roku, or whatever. They all come with the microphone and with the camera, if there is one, activated. And try to find the settings to turn it off, right? The problem is there really aren't that many choices because they're all tracking you. Healthcare data, countless information here. Fitbit, right? Great little app to track your health on your wrist, right? You put it on your wrist, you got all kinds of great health stuff. It's no mistake that Google bought them, right? Why did Google buy them? Because they wanted a fitness app? Give me a break. They want the data because they're a company that trades in data, right? I talk about this Flow app a bit. It's an interesting one. Women's periods was not something that was discussed when I was a kid, right? That was something that my grandmother might whisper with one of the other, my mother in a side conversation, but certainly not with a man in the room. Wasn't a talked about topic. And certainly if there was any kind of logbook about menstrual cycles or whatever, I didn't know about it. And if I did, it was probably hidden in some top drawer in a little notebook someplace. Well, what they now have is they have these free apps, right? Flow or Ovia. And basically, women can put their cycle information in there, right? And now the app knows what time of the month to send them contraceptives, or what time of the, or when to send them baby products, or what to share with their healthcare provider to basically offer health products, or perhaps look at their risk profile and charge them more for insurance, and your list goes on and on. So I was talking about this one in particular because I've got 3 daughters, and I mentioned this to the girls. I said, "Did you know about this app I just read about?" And they said, "Oh," all 3 of them said, "Yeah, we use it." And my wife about dropped her jaw and fell, and she did, "What? You're putting all that information out there?" And I started explaining to them what's happening with that data and how much they've inadvertently released, and they were just shocked, right? And that's the whole thing, is people are giving data away about their personal lives that they may want to share, but they're not even aware that they're sharing, and they're not aware of how it's used. So your data's been taken. Let's talk about how your data is being used. So I went in the paper and I've been scanning local articles, okay? So, we have a problem with car theft, right? So the city of Stanton started to install license plate reading devices as you enter and enter out of the major roadways of the town, right? By the way, Lake Forest has done the same thing, right? I happen to catch this in a local paper here, and you say, you know what, that's great. We have a problem with car theft, right? Wonderful. But wait a minute. What happens when I drive into town? You're reading my license plate too. I didn't steal a car. How do you know? Are you tracking me into where I went, where I parked? Do you know that somebody perhaps pulled into Planned Parenthood, or maybe to a mosque or a temple? The point is, you're being tracked, and you really haven't been given the rights to opt out. So while there's always a good to this, right, the dangers on the flip side is that your privacy is in a way really being invaded here, and we don't know. And by the way, this extends to drones, helicopters, all kinds of technology that's being used to supposedly for security and safety, but at the same time, what hands is it getting into, especially with the number of breaches going on? So this is how you're being tracked in your neighborhood. Let's talk about your house. How many of you have a Ring doorbell or any similar product? So Ring has been in the paper quite a bit. In fact, they have a deal with law enforcement to share information that's captured on the videos and on the audio recordings in Ring devices with law enforcement.
Jeez.
When you bought your Ring doorbell, did you know that they were doing that? Right? In fact, Ring doorbells, there's even cameras internally to watch, in this case, a girl's room. Parents are using it as a child monitor. Hackers got into the Ring doorbell because it's sitting on the home network, used the voice activation to basically say something to the effect of, hey, little girl, are your parents home? Why don't you come outside and play with me, right? Some creep logged in. And this is kind of the exposure you have with Ring. So not only do you have the exposure of it being hacked to go internally, right, and track things, you also have data that's being given up to agencies and to people that you're not even aware it's being shared with, right? So do you want your visitor data just randomly shared with, with others? And it could be law enforcement or other commercial entities that you're not even aware it's being shared with, right? And again, I'm not saying don't get a Ring doorbell. I'm saying just buy it with open eyes, right? Because people aren't aware what's really happening behind the scenes on all of this. So this is in your home. Let's talk about facial images. When you load a picture into Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, you name it, there's this company called Clearview AI. And they basically scrape those databases and photos that you've innocently uploaded. They put facial recognition technology on top of it, and then basically sell it to whoever wants to buy it. Again, law enforcement is a big customer. So that basically, if you put up, let's say, a LinkedIn profile picture, and now eventually a cop pulls you over, by the time that patrol officer gets out of his car and approaches you to give you your speeding ticket or whatever, he already knows everything about you, because not only does he have your picture and facial recognition, he knows everything about all of this data that's been collected. He has a profile. He knows pretty much everything about you. This has been done again without any kind of blockers or any kind of consent, right? And so Clearview has actually been brought into court for this, right? And while they're in the middle of this court case, guess what? They got hacked. So now the information is available out on the dark web for anybody who wants it, including criminals, right? So now imagine if a criminal now knows your face, they know your picture, they know where you live, they know your family members, et cetera, et cetera. Now you become targets, right? So this is really, really kind of a scary way things have gone. So you say, what does this all really matter, right? Well, let's talk how this is really being used. There is a personality profile indicator here, and you can see it on this complicated chart on the right-hand side. And basically what it is, it's a series of parameters that you use in psychological profiling that gives you indications of a person's profile, right? How outgoing are you, right? How much do you value liberty, right? How self-conscious are you? To what degree are you self-conscious? To what degree are you artistic, right? What's your intellect, right? How much self-discipline do you have? All these different factors come together. And by knowing all of this data about you, you're able to come up with a pretty darn accurate profile of who you are, right? And that profile is then used to target ads to you. The biggest company that did this is, you may remember, a case called the Cambridge Analytica case. Cambridge Analytica is a company that was hired by the Trump administration. By the way, not political, because every company, every administration and cause does this, so this is not unique. This one just happened to make the news. But Cambridge Analytica had an API or connector into Facebook. They pulled all of your data out along with Google data. Google, by the way, Facebook had 5,000 data points on every single user, okay? 5,000. So with 87 million Facebook users and 5,000 data points apiece, they basically said, we can profile anybody out there. In fact, we can tell you where the swing districts are, and not even swing districts, we can tell you who the swing voters are in those districts. And we can tell you about, based on their personality profile, what kind of ads they're likely to be receptive to. So on the bottom here is one of the ads that was used. There was a profile that said a person is very conscientious, right? And a person that's conscientious on the psychological profile is one who tends to like order and order and so on. So the ad they send them is this ad that says, look up marriage and get back to me, right? It was about a Bible and a dictionary, very orderly, structured kinds of things that appealed to a conscientious person. So that's the ad they sent. If you were a non-conscientious person, they had a different ad. And this is how they use these mechanisms to sway elections, and not only elections, but sway social opinion on different topics. I was involved before I got into data privacy and organizational change management, basically getting large projects installed at companies, SAP implementations, that sort of thing. And the biggest challenge was getting people on board. I met a company that did this out of Australia. And they would use data science like this to collect information about all of the employees in a business, give us profiles, and then give us targeted messaging to get people on board with our changes. And I started talking to them and I said, geez, that's interesting. I said, who else do you do this for? I said, oh, we do it all around the world for governments, for political parties, for causes. We do some things for people that are pro or con abortion, pro or con gay marriage. It doesn't matter, but we're actually using this to sway opinions globally for different causes and to change people's beliefs, right? So all of this data that you're collecting in and putting together is really put together for purposes for which you never intended when you signed up for that little app on your phone, right? This is where it's all going. It's contributing to this. Brad, I'll let you take this on here.
Yeah, so it's not new. I mean, we all know we've been living with credit scores for a long time. They can predict your income. They know about your psychographics, your propensity to buy certain things. I'm not the ideal buyer for a BMW, but I'm sure somebody in that crowd is. Experian has 66 lifestyles. We've always been rank ordered by GPA, SAT, class, DMV, and the Chinese have a very credible and historic social credit score, which is off to your left, which identifies whether people should or should not get rewards or punishments in their society. But the new you, kind of as a result of all this data and the algorithms and the artificial intelligence, we've got some new players and we've got some new questions that are a little beyond creepy. Like SIFT is answering a simple question for Airbnb and OkCupid: can you be trusted? Airbnb people want to make sure they don't have any damage to their place. Likely, okay. Zeta, do you have money to spend? The retailer equation: will you return purchases? What about my personal reputation? My life tracks that very well. Tracks your database. If I get a ticket, apparently I'm down 7 grades. I don't know. Ocean, how persuadable are you? And Riskified, how crooked are you? So we've got some interesting and sort of creepy things going on that redefine who you are in society. Remember, we were talking about that in the millennials, that your digital identity is different than who you are. Well, guess what? These systems don't know, but people like Airbnb, BMW, etc., buy you in a score and they treat you certain ways. And they may even know before you get to the cash register at Nordstrom's who you are, because they potentially scan your face. They put that through a artificial intelligence, and they know whether you're going to return what would otherwise be a very fancy dress. So as a result, this data has never been more valuable, and your data is being stolen. Steve, next slide, please. Thanks. And the next one after that. This is a recent list of the prices being paid by nefarious actors in the dark web. And these prices fluctuate. And one of our partners shares with us, we have a security partner who does a nice scan on any one business. For example, City of Orange had 21% of the usernames and credentials being sold on the web freely. But more importantly, they had about 3% of those credentials were related to credit cards. So as you look through this list, kind of interesting. Social security numbers used to be worth quite a bit of money not too long ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Guess what? You only needed $2. That's all they're worth these days. That tells you how commonplace some of these things have become. On the other hand, an eBay account with good reputation, man, that's worth a grand each. So, it's pretty interesting that you are for sale essentially to nefarious actors. Why? Well, they're targeting you with all kinds of strange things, offers, scams, you name it. And of course, they're preying on you in terms of installing malware. We're going to get to in a second. Next slide, please. So the increase in ransomware, many of you have been tracking it, has actually had a 700% increase of ransomware attacks. We have a very good partner in Marsh McLennan, Marshmac, and the lead gentleman there who does underwriting has informed us that starting about 6 months ago, commercial insurers stopped just plainly writing cyber insurance. You basically can't get it unless you pass 6 or 7 gates that are pretty high for a lot of companies. And of course, they've raised the price of cyber insurance for all those reasons, right? There is a lot of money being paid, and now the insurers are fighting back. If you are a part, or any of your companies are a part of this, please call us at Pravagio. We can we can at least guide you to be more proactive. This is a real threat. Cyber insurance used to be the cheapest thing on the street, one of the greatest values, but over the last 2 years, because of ransomware, no longer the case. So, this is all part of the ecosystem. And yeah, so the types of top causes of loss you might be interested in: segregated and encrypted offline backups. These are tactics of how you do it, but 31% of those losses in 2019 were ransomware. 16% were business email. Compromise or staff error, basically usernames and passwords kept insecurely or mimicked. 8% hacked. You see the dial there. Kind of interesting. That is, and by the way, if you were to overlay how many of those are caused by employee weakness, either a phishing scam, a corrupted username and password, not corrupted, a stolen one, you'll find that over 50% of enterprises have lost because they're not training their employees properly or not enough. And so the malware is just coming right into the email system and into the core systems. There are many tactics. There's a whole new list, thanks to the commercial underwriters, starting with multi-factor authentication. That's the two-way authentication that banks use and have used for a number of years. But now you really kind of have to have incident response. You have to have air-gapped backups. You can't have your backups connected to one another. They have to be air-gapped. You have to have automated detection and response systems of malware in real time, because time is of the essence, and on you go. So when Steve started talking about privacy and got in the game, we spend solidly 60% of our time lately talking security first and then privacy, for the obvious reason. And privacy is a close cousin. So this data is being stolen and being used, and it's something to be aware of in the broader spectrum of, wait a minute, what have I given to Target? Wait a minute, what have I given to Uber? Wait a minute, what have I contributed in order to get that out? So think about that. Most companies honestly don't have a handle on how to secure your data, and that's why it's being stolen.
So with that, we have talked a little bit about why privacy is important to you personally, right? Why is your personal data important? We've talked about how you've given it up, right? And how companies have either used it for purposes for which you didn't intend, or how others, hackers, have gotten it and used it and sold it on the open market, right? So there's this huge economy here around this. And what's happened is that law has started to step in. So the legal response really comes in the form of a couple of different things. And I'm going to focus on the right-hand side of this chart here. I'm sorry, left-hand side first, and talk about the US. In the US, for many years, as the internet started to mature, we started to pass privacy laws. So Gramm-Leach-Bliley to protect your financial transactions in the financial sector. HIPAA to protect your healthcare data, right? COPA to protect children's data online, FERPA for education data, and others. These were sector-based protections, right? And if you didn't fall in that sector, there was a free-for-all. What's happened in the US is that we have, after the lead of Europe passing GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which was really the first major global consumer protection law, California said, you know what, that's a great idea. And California passed the CCPA, or the California Consumer Privacy Act, and kind of mimics the European law. It's different because the US is different, but California was the first state to adapt that. And then later, in a ballot initiative last year, voted in a CCPA 2.0, we call it the CPRA, which takes effect in 2023. So basically, we have strengthened the California law quite a bit. But while California was leading the way here, and we're certainly substantial with about 12% of the US population being a California resident, Virginia has followed suit and Colorado has followed suit. And look at all of the other states that are shaded that are in various stages of considering and or passing data privacy laws. The problem we have is that every state's law is different. So how do you manage through this patchwork of state laws and this patchwork of sector-based laws in the United States and figure out your way through it? And that's the complication of data privacy today. And that's part of what we help clients work through. But if that's not bad enough, if you do business outside of the United States, you've also got to deal with the laws of Europe, GDPR's law, Brazil, Canada, South Africa, India, China. You add to the list, it just keeps on going, right? So for multinationals, you really have this crazy new function that you've got to deal with, the laws of which are all over the map, literally. In California alone, when CCPA was passed in 2018, it was passed right around the time that the European Privacy Act took effect in 2018. All of the indicators, I'm not going to go through these, but every caret you see here, the blue and the green ones, are various revisions that have taken place so far. In fact, we expect that the California alone, not only is California a law there, but we're probably going to see about 26, 27 revisions to California privacy law between when the time it was passed and 2023 when it takes full effect. So this is a constant moving variable here, and it's even for those of us who are in the business full time, it's difficult to keep on top of it. And most businesses don't have those resources to do it. So there's confusion. What do these laws do? Well, fundamentally, they give consumers some new rights. One is you have the right to know what data is being collected about you. So you can go to a business you're doing with and say, hey, I want to know everything you have about me, right? I want to know how you're using it and what you have it for. And that's a right under the new California Privacy Act. You also have the right to ask the company to delete your data or to correct your data, right? Now, deletion has some limitations if there's a legal requirement to keep it or if you need to fulfill a contract with the customer and so on. But basically, consumers now have the right to do this, right? They have a right to have their data, to have you disclose it to them in what they call a portable format, right? So some way that you can literally get it and then take it with you to an attorney or to keep it in your drawer or whatever you need to do with it, right? So all of these rights are there. You have the right to opt out of the sale of your data in California, if you're a California resident, right? Interesting, in Europe, the opt-out right is there and you have to opt in, right? So it's completely flipped around, but nevertheless, California has this opt-out rule. So I can say, hey, I no longer want you to sell my data. And by the way, California doesn't define sale of data as sale for necessarily monetary reasons. It could be for an exchange of services. So it's a very broad definition of what a sale is. Many companies share data for consideration other than dollars. You have the right to seek damages as a consumer, and you have a right to equal service. In other words, if I tell you to delete my data or not to sell it, you can't treat me different than other customers. And these fundamental rights are pretty consistent across privacy laws, although there's details that vary. These are some of the themes you'll commonly see. So what are the business's requirements? Well, I've now got to, on the business side, be able to, customer says, tell me all the data you have about me and how you're using it. I've got to provide it. I have to put in workflows and systems to hand that over. Most businesses don't know where their data even is. So one of the things you do in data privacy is to create an inventory of the personal data that you collect. You need it not only to respond to privacy laws, but you also need it to secure yourself in the event of cyber attack. Imagine if somebody broke into your home and you found that there was a break-in. What's the first thing you do after you check to make sure that your family's okay? Right? You go and say, did they get the jewels? Did they get the costume jewelry, or did they get grandma's good ring, right? Did they get to my coin collection? Did they find the cash under my mattress or wherever? All of these things, you really kind of have an inventory. You know where your treasured goods are. And companies have to start treating their personal data in the same way. Because if you're breached, you have to provide notice by law to everybody whose data was breached and what they got. And if you haven't got the inventory, how do you do that? And by the way, if you do, you might find out that only this small sector of my customers has it, and I don't need to notify everybody. I can significantly, minimize my response and just respond to those people. You have to have a process to manage consumer consent, because these laws not only give consumers transparency to see what you have, but the right to consent to its use, right? You've got to put processes in place to make sure there's no discrimination. And you have to make sure that any of the third parties you share this data with also are using it properly. So reviewing your third party contracts, making sure that your indemnification clauses are in place, that the obligations in the event of a privacy request or a breach are clearly spelled out. All of that needs to be there, right? Under CPRA, which is coming, you've got new notice obligations. So you have to notify people at time of collection what you're doing with the data. You have also data minimization requirements. No longer can you leave data that doesn't have a useful purpose for your business, a commercial purpose to complete the transaction you were asked to complete, or of course for legal requirements. But if you're keeping data for other than those reasons, you've got to have a data retention policy, and you've got to minimize your data you keep, personal data. And you have to demonstrate compliance because there's an audit requirement. And the big difference with CPRA is that California is now funded an enforcement agency that is funded to the tune of $10 million a year by edict, right? And they also get to keep a portion of the data of the fines they collect in this process as well. So this is similar to what Europe does. They have state agencies dedicated to enforcing data privacy. Prior to this, it was the Attorney General, it was a couple of small staff trying to do this, but now with this enforcement agency, watch out, they're getting serious. The AG's message so far has been, if you make reasonable attempts, we'll go lighter on you. If you've made no attempts, we're coming down hard. And secondly, you've now had several years to get ready, guys. So when enforcement really starts in 2023, we're not going to be giving you too many, breaks anymore. You've had plenty of time.
We had a question for the field, and I think it's a good one. How do I opt out? How do I get them to stop selling my data? And it is absolutely in the current CCPA rights for consumers that you can request that. They should be disclosing if they're selling or sharing data. As Steve mentioned, there's a pretty broad combination there. And just like deletion, they have an obligation to respond to you to say that they have reached out to third parties with whom they've been selling or sharing. So you absolutely have that right today.
Thanks for catching that, Brad. Brad, why don't you take it from here and talk about the consumer and business response?
Yeah, I don't want to overwhelm this. There's an awful lot of data being collected. Overall, consumers are angry, and they are now seeing the potential risks are far outweighing the benefits of having someone have their data. No surprise, right? They read the papers, at least some of us do. And about half of us have felt like they've lost control. But here's the thing for business, churn is real. 48% have stopped buying, 39% would walk away, and 53% to whoever's point was, would ask for their information back if they were afforded the option. And in California, they are. So really, this comes down to trust. And what's interesting about this, in Europe, the companies that, well, we'll come back to this in a second, but in general, the business response has been very positive in Europe. But here in US, 64% will blame the company, not the hacker, in the loss of personal data. And they'd be partially right. Yes, we have to be able to secure your data, but really, who's to blame, right? The hacker or the company for not having good enough defenses? 45% say the federal government should be responsible for protecting data privacy. But the truth is, the federal government may be the greatest user of your private data behind the scenes. So they have a challenge, and states' rights being what they are, they have a difficult time getting a uniform response. And lastly, virtually all of us say that their willingness to share is very much based on how much they trust the company. It's a Price Waterhouse. So consumers are aware, they're angry, but they're not aware enough yet to go knocking on the door and executing these rights as CCPA, which is ironic. We consult with companies all the time, and they just honestly don't see this groundswell. And part of it's just who we are as a culture, different than Europe. Go ahead, Steve.
And we haven't done the public outreach campaign, which the enforcement agency will begin doing when they get up and running. So,
yeah, a follow-on, someone asked the question, I think is a good one. Why is opting out so darn difficult? It seems to require a form to complete, and you have to get approval by someone. Well, you answered your own question. Do they really want you to opt out? How much money is being made, especially for apps that you don't pay anything up front? You know there's a business model behind there. So they're making it difficult. And by the way, that's part of the California law. It has to be plain English, clear to understand, and you really have to engage the consumer. When you go back a couple of slides, the most meaningful change of the law is now it has teeth and an agency that's funded in California to execute this law. Prior to this, there hasn't been funding. Business. Most companies are on it. They're actively working on it. They might not be going fast enough. Here's a frightening thought. 77% of IT professionals say they don't have a cybersecurity incident response plan. I think that's falling fast, but we're seeing a tremendous number. And by the way, remember we talked about insurance. That's the number 2 requirement beside multi-factor authentication for you to even get insurance. The average company, depending on size, about 500,000 files of sensitive data. But 53% of companies have about 1,000 sensitive files open to every employee. So when we think about security, we go beyond the exterior and we look at, does that person within the organization have a right or a need to be able to see your data? About half of us have had their data breached one way or the other. I don't know if you know, but the Target breach many years ago was actually done through a fax machine. That's how they got through, the Wi-Fi connection on the fax machine. The average cost of a breach per record is about $150. And it's not uncommon for there to be hundreds of thousands of records lost. So do the math. The average breach loss is about $4 million, and is why insurers have stopped paying. You would too. Kind of good news, 40% of companies are seeing the benefits of about 2 times, meaning something around 100% return on their privacy spend. Almost all companies see a competitive advantage or investor appeal from investing in privacy, according to Cisco. In Europe, companies that really do privacy well actually have a top line benefit to the tune of about 11%, which is wonderful. So when you start treating your customers' data as your own and honoring that, you actually get some nice benefit at the corporate level. But we're not there yet in the United States. We don't. Trust kind of comes and goes. It's a little bit of the wild, wild west.
Brad, we have a question here, and it's a good one. So the question is there one central location where you can, like a do not call list, where you can opt out of getting having your data shared? And the interesting answer there is that there are cottage industries starting. So if you imagine the number of apps and companies you deal with that that have your personal data, and if you were to go and submit individual requests to each of those companies, it would take you a long time. It'd be very burdensome. There is no one central place like a do not call list to go to, but there are services coming up that say, hey, I tell you what, we'll do this on your behalf. So allow us to use your with your permission. We'll go and act as an agent for you, and we will submit data subject requests, these requests, to all the companies you do business with. And so they're actually automating it as a business model right now. And for companies that aren't compliant, they'll collect some fines and they'll make some money on it, right? Take them to court. So that's very much, we're seeing some of the large retailers starting to see that. And it's very interesting how that's evolving.
It's
Um, I have a comment to make here. I am in the life insurance industry, and privacy is certainly of utmost importance, and compliance is enormous. All the outbound phone calls that I have to make go through the federal do not call list, because I don't do it through my phone, I do it through the computer, and it goes to my phone. And so if I have a do not call, someone who's put on the federal, I can override it to say it's a relationship or whatever. But otherwise, if I don't know that person, I cannot call them. And then there's the state level, and there's also within New York Life, a New York Life do not call list. So it filters through all of them. And I'm licensed in Texas as well. And Texas actually does not allow telemarketing to mobile phones. So that one I can't even override. So there are some automatic things out there, and the same with all of my mails are kept for 7 years or whatever. But there is, you just put yourself on the federal do not call list. And what you have to then do is make sure that the people who are marketing go through the do not call list to see if you can call.
Well, I wish that the 6 people who call me every day selling some services were as good as you about checking the list.
Well, I get in trouble otherwise.
Well, you're a regulated business, right? But
Yeah.
how many do we get that don't, right?
Yeah.
But there's nothing like that for privacy. There very much is, in other areas, but not on the privacy side. The other comment, Brad, before we go on here, I think it's worth noting on this business response. You made a comment about Europe and how consumer-facing companies that treat consumers' data with respect are seeing growth in top-line sales. It sounded kind of esoteric. When we started the business 2.5 years ago, Brad and I both felt very strongly that was a great position to take. What we've seen is if you look at Tim Cook from Apple, you look at the CEO of Microsoft, you look at the CEOs of Cisco, they're making very public statements that say, we will not sell your personal data. We could, and we could make money on it, but that's not our business. Now, all of those businesses happen to have other revenue streams, right? And I'm not saying you trust Apple or whatever, but they have other revenue streams. They make money from products, right? Turn around and wonder, why hasn't that same message come from places like Google or Facebook or others? Why? Because they make money purely on selling the data, right? And using it. So, but having said that, subscribers, people are leaving Facebook because of the concerns in the marketplace. Google Chrome was the primary browser. Now you're starting to see privacy-oriented browser like Brave and DuckDuckGo come up and others. You're starting to see a shift in the US where consumers are starting to walk with their feet, and businesses that respond by treating their customers' data with respect and building that trust are seeing that they're protecting that relationship and actually able to keep more data from that customer than if they don't. So it's more than a compliance play here. It's actually a sales revenue play as well. Privacy really is, good for business in that sense. So Brad, I'll let you go back into the trade piece here, but
yeah. So it's interesting that we dove into the next slide without even really thinking about it. Someone asked the question, who's doing this? Well, this second red bullet, there are people, businesses starting up that are creating marketplaces where they keep your data in a blockchain and they allow you to sell it, exchange it, and you as a consumer get paid. And why would you get paid? Well, look above. You're depending on the average Google user is worth about $5,000 a year. Have you seen the total value of Google lately? Facebook, highly variable. I don't know. I haven't checked on this number in a while. It may have fallen down a bit. It ranges from about $50 a month to about $200 per user. The fitness data being shared with insurers is worth somewhere between $200 and $350 a year. So there is a real active trade, and we're going to be able to soon, if not immediately, you're going to be able to claw back value for offering that data to them willingly. We'll see how fast this happens. But to Steve's point about brokers, it's more than brokers. There are businesses emerging so that you can control your data. And I think that's actually a good thing. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. Next slide. We're almost there, folks. Hang in there with us.
Oh, this is great, Brad. This is beautiful.
Good. You know, the ad tech business is about a $77 billion business. It's an extraordinary amount of money being made on ads. And it's one of the reasons why we see a lot of backbiting here. Google was seeking to replace cookies, which today trace you, and all kinds of embedded codes are tracing you from site to site. They actually came up with this thing called FLoC, which is the Federated Learning of Cohorts. In short, in every week, they're going to identify who you are and what you're looking for. Maybe this week I'm looking for car insurance. Next week I'm looking for baby gifts. Next week I'm looking for travel. And in those situations, they would provide that data and you anonymized so that advertisers can go out, but not you specifically. So the problem with that is you're still giving a lot of power to a monarchy, right? Google, Facebook, all of those guys would then still be the ones controlling how you're personified in those cohorts. And the question would be, you know, can you opt out, right? They obviously get paid that 77 billion in one form or another. So we have a couple of legal partners that are really engrossed in this, and it is all of this is the wild, wild west, folks. But this particular area, because of the dollars involved, is out of control, and is kind of one of the reasons why we're having some federal discussions. I don't know if we have.
Adding into that, if I might, you know, a good example is for those of you who are iPhone users, there was an upgrade to a new version of the platform, Apple platform, not long ago. And what under Android or under the old platform, what you'd have to do is look at all of your apps and go into each app individually and decide to opt out of sharing or opt out, right? Or delete cookies or so on. What Apple said is we're going to give centralized control. We're going to let in the operating system on your phone or whatever, we're going to give you one place where you can flip a flag that says, don't share my data, right? And they did this, and the advertisers absolutely flipped a lid, right? They moved significant advertising dollars away from Apple and over to Google over the course of the last year.
That wasn't very long ago. Was that like 3 months ago, Steve?
Yeah.
It was very recent. Yeah.
Very recent, right? So there's this ad war going on, right? Now, Apple is sticking to their guns and saying, hey, tough, we're not doing this, right? And even Google is looking at a cookieless browser, right? But they're not giving you that central flag. So back to the do not call list, Apple is trying to implement that in their operating systems, and they're trying to implement the same feature in browsers so that you as a user can, if you're using a Chrome browser, you can go in and say, hey, I want to opt out. And anybody who uses that, you know, browser, all the advertisers that can make money on it can't use your flag to identify you. But that's where these cohorts come in. They trick you on the back end and saying, well, okay, so I can't opt Brad out, but I'm going to throw him into this cohort and define him as a car shopper, right? And Brad's like, I haven't shopped for a car. I'm not interested in a car. And how do I get out of the cohort? Well, you don't. It's just magic that happens in the back end, right? So it's kind of a little bit of a trick to kind of get you to think you have control. But as Brad said, you really can't opt out. But this is live happening. This is Apple's big play in privacy this year. They're putting the money behind what they've been saying, and they're paying the price right now.
So we spent a better part of an hour, I think, planting way too much FUD, uncertainty, and doubt. We didn't mean to do that. Unfortunately, it's the world we're living in. So a couple of things before we start, we finish up here is, if you have children, start having the conversation. Start really thinking about that. You should be thinking about the apps on your phone immediately. Turn off geolocation if you're on Android. If you don't know how to do it, find out. It's doable. Steve and I, once we break for this year, we probably will have part 2 of this, because we spent the best part of an hour explaining what's going on. Now the question is, what do you do about it? So we're going to have to spend 3 months trying to figure that out in terms of empowering people. but I can tell you what we're doing for go back one, Steve.
Sorry.
I can tell you what we're doing for customers. We simplify what privacy is into these buckets. And we were the first one to create this framework. And it's astonishing to us even now, when we started the business 2.5 years ago, that it holds true today. We go deep dive, and we help companies put their toe in, and we build strategies and we help them execute. That's what we do as a business. If you know a business that needs that, or you would like to refer us, please reach us. You know, I think Steve mentioned, and I guess you can tell we're a little bit passionate about this. It's about individuals taking back control. We love that. And by the way, businesses that enable it, it's good for business. We fervently believe that. We're being proven right in Europe, and it's a real opportunity to differentiate your customer experience. And that's the last slide. So literally, I think it was exactly an hour. And for those of you who are now asleep, or you got your head down, or thank you for hanging in there with us.
Yes, sir. Well,
yeah.
Thank you, Brad, very much. It was excellent. And thank you, Steve, as well. Any questions? First of all, how do I get this screen back? Okay, there we go. Stop share, right?
I'll stop share here, and it's all yours.
There you go. Any questions for our presenters today? I mean, this was a great presentation. I mean, somebody's got to have some questions. We had a lot in the chat.
I've got one. Let's see if anyone else has any questions first, but I've got one.
Go for it, Bill.
This may be slightly, go ahead.
I was just say, I don't so much have a question as to say, I look forward to part 2.
So do we. So do we. It sounds like we got our holiday vacation plan, thanks to Larry.
You know, just keep the gravy off the keyboard. The turkey will be fine.
There you go.
No, but I've generally been one of those people that says, yeah, I have Gmail, so what? Now, I have pulled back from Facebook for a number of reasons, but that's just a little piece. And, you know, I'm going to step away and think about just where does this affect me? But then the next question will be, what do we do about it?
Yeah, it's difficult. I've had a Gmail account forever. Everybody knows my Gmail account. How do you really pull out? And do you really want to start paying for your email again, Larry?
Well, it depends. I mean, I have a Hotmail account tucked away that I use when I really don't want something on Gmail, but you know, this was very thought-provoking. I can't really say that I have all the answers on,
No,
you know, I guess it would say how much is
how much is it worth?
How much is
mail
privacy worth?
cost?
Yeah. And it's worth a lot to other people. They're monetizing you left and right. That's all we've proven. It's a better conversation of, okay, am I okay with that trade?
Yeah. So I think
And
I would
part of me
like-
got excited to find out how much money I could make selling my own information on the web, you know?
Right.
There you
That
go.
was pretty-
Right. Bill, you
No,
started with a legitimate question, I think. And not that Larry's wasn't legitimate, but you were actually hanging in there with the format.
Oh, well, I'll let Andrew go first, and then
Yeah,
I'll
that's right.
ask.
Oh, no, it's just
No,
very quick.
go for
That I would definitely pay. I have several accounts. My Yahoo account that I've had forever is where when I need to buy something or I subscribe to something, I give them my Yahoo email. And for me, you have the junk email in your Gmail account. Yahoo is my junk email account.
Well, that may be totally fine, right? How much did Yahoo cost you?
Free.
Yep, so you know what's happening, right? Nothing's free. You're the consumer when it's free. But I tell you what, to both of you, I mean, this is why I want to get the part 2 written when I have some spare time. But one of the tactics, for example, is you can continue using Yahoo or Gmail, right? Maybe you switch your primary to, Hotmail or something, or, a different platform. I always think about it this way. If the platform that I'm using free, and does the company that I'm doing business with make money from sources other than selling data, right? And so if I have to trust myself somewhere, and I have a choice between, let's say, a Microsoft account or a Google account, right? and say, well, it may not be perfect, but Microsoft is less likely to sell my data because they don't need to, right? Google has no choice. That's their business. So that's one thing. And then secondly, there are some secure emails out there like Proton Mail. And what some people have done is said, you know what, all of my financial transactions and financial communications with my bank and broker are going to go through Proton Mail only, right? And all of my, stuff that I'm shopping for, my personal, that I don't care about, that I don't care if somebody scans and reads, that stays in Gmail, right? And so you can segment that way. And that's part two, which once we have written, maybe we'll come back and present.
Good.
The
Mark
tough thing
Perret.
is that, sorry,
Yeah,
the tough thing is that the things, when I buy something sizable, it's the next 2 weeks that I get the ads.
Of course.
Like that ship sailed.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm gonna go back and watch Minority Report to see what I'm doing wrong.
All right, Bill,
Sorry,
you can
Bill,
ask
I've
your
stepped
question.
on you a few times. Go ahead.
Bill.
Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, you answered part of it before I asked it. So there are paid services like Proton Mail. What about paid Yahoo email? Is it any different than a free Yahoo email? I know it gives, aliases and different ways of sort of managing your email. Do you have any comments on that?
I don't want to pick one provider over the other here. I don't trust either one of those two, to be honest with you. I just think they're good for, look, if you want to have an account, you sign up for junk mail to get your subscriptions for some magazines or something, who cares? Use it for that. But if you're transacting anything that's sensitive or even emails to your family or whatever, remember these guys, they're scanning the email for keywords to help build that profile that I showed you, right? So they may not be reading every single word because, Larry, you send an email, they're reading that Gmail, right? And they're going to say, yeah, based on this email, here's Larry's preferences. It looks like he's emailing a lot about cars. Maybe we'll drop him a car ad, right? But that's not just your email. It's combined with everything else that you've got out there, right?
Well, I try to
5,000 data points.
include free car, but that never gets the right ad. So,
Never gets the right one, yeah.
no.
Which is the one Steve, what was the server that you recommended for doing your finances on?
I'm suggesting there are some secure email platforms. Proton Mail is one of them. There are others. You can Google and find some of them. And again, I'm not saying they're completely 100% secure, but they're certainly more secure. They encrypt the transaction you send, end-to-end encryption, and at least there's a little bit more there. But look, no guarantees, right? And that's the problem. There are no guarantees. But as this shift is changing, you're seeing providers come out that are starting to provide these more secure products and market them that way, right? And that's what you got to watch out for.
A little bit of rule of thumb here. If they're awfully big, they're likely a data aggregator, and other people are going to them to buy that data because they're big, because they can get to enough and slice it. Google, Yahoo, Microsoft, all those guys have your data. JP Morgan, we mentioned it, right? They're now going to one of the top 5 banks in the world. On the other side, be leery of really small apps because they're playing fast and loose, right? There is still a business model. They can sell that data. They're doing it, and they're going to do it out of their garage for as long as they can before they get shut down or someone fights back. So I would stick to middle-sized companies who probably have a finite amount of data, right? So keep that in mind as you think about the providers you choose. It's pretty tough to avoid the bigs, but it's just a kind of a rule of thumb there.
What about the privacy of using Zoom accounts, of which everybody has probably had several hundred, if not thousands,
Well,
in international meetings?
Yeah, I mean, Steve can speak to this, but there's been at least 5 or 6 iterations of major problems with the privacy on Zoom, of crashing, and they've improved, but nothing's foolproof. This is a pretty wide platform. Steve, I think you know a little bit more about this thing.
Yeah, I think go try to find a platform that's secure. The more as you buy subscription services, you get more of the end-to-end encryption protection than you do with the free accounts. But so you do get more. Nothing's foolproof. I tried looking around for something other than Zoom, and everything I looked at, unless you want to go into very onerous kind of high, Defense Department kind of systems that cost a lot of money. you're not going to get there.
And keep it-
There are systems, for example, that will allow specialized applications like a doctor-patient, remote visits, that kind of thing, right? They'll pay for very high-end systems that will be super encrypted, but for us average guys just doing this on a day-to-day basis, that's not affordable.
Now,
you know.
we're in a relatively trusted group, but 4 of you, I can tell a lot about your lifestyle by the background. Think about that. I know Elliot is a Beatles fan. I know Larry
My
might be a
son.
very good cook. Mike collects things from far off places. I think he's got dishes, and on it goes. There's actually a really interesting article about this in the Wall Street Journal, just talking about what we can tell from people's backgrounds. So Bill's got the right idea. Use your fuzz your background. Go a little bit more incognito. Of course, Julia's winning, Lewis is winning, and Alan's winning because we don't even see those guys.
Thank you.
Gotta turn off my camera.
Come on, Julia.
One kind of off the wall question I had, one of my favorite TV shows was called Person of Interest, and the creator had the machine. It was always watching you.
Yeah.
And
Love that show.
how close to a reality? I mean, is that a corporate reality, becoming a corporate reality these days rather than a individual billionaire / government kind of reality, or how close is that to becoming you're always being watched kind of thing?
Oh, you're there.
You're totally.
We're there.
You're
Oh,
totally
yeah.
there.
Well,
Hey,
think
look,
about.
so again, and not political, because I'll make this in 2 different things, right? The crowd that was in Washington on January 6th has all been facial recognized and identified and tracked down and either hauled into court or whatever, right? And by the way, on the flip side, same thing with riots in Seattle with the Black Lives Movement. That was tracked down by Ring doorbells, by cameras in the street, by whatever, to identify the individuals and bring them in, right? Good, bad, or indifferent, right? What if one day, and again, I decide to say, look, I want to take all people of a certain religion and I want to haul them in. I know I can see the camera in front of your mosque or in front of your church or in front of your club you belong. I want to go, get all financial executives. I'm going to find all the FANG members as they walk into the next FANG meeting, right? I mean, the point is, it's doable. It's there. It exists. The cameras are everywhere. You can't escape it. I know where your phone is. Right. I walked past a shop locally to buy some food. Right. And I walked in, gave him my debit card, walked out, sat in my car to check my email before I drove off. And I saw a "thank you for shopping with us" note from that store. Right. I walked by and I got home, and then a week later, I'm like, well, how did they get my email? Right. Then I get "how was your meal? I hope you come back." And they drop me a coupon. I've walked past stores on the sidewalk where they pick up my phone and drop a coupon on and say, "Hey, if you stop in right now, I'll give you 10% off on this, whatever, in my windows." Right? So you're being surveilled everywhere you go, Bill. And that's why we're trying to claw this back. Right? That's why these laws are here to say, hold on. Now, the question is, has the train left too much, for one? These laws are about protecting the commercial side, the consumer part of data. But the government, all hands off.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Steve. Not to belabor this, but the more stale that data becomes, the less valuable it is, right? They know some things, okay, they'll always know my age, fine, but they don't know what I bought recently, to Larry's point, or when I bought it, or where I bought it, or how often I go shopping. I become a lot less interesting. So think about that.
I was in the digital advertising business for a period of time, and I went to a digital advertising convention. This is probably 10 years ago. And the technology they were showing us was billboards. So if you were walking past a billboard in an airport, the billboard would see your face. It would know whether you're male or female. It would know what age you are. And it would display an ad for a car that was appropriate for that demographic. So if you're a cute 20-year-old girl walking past the ad, you're going to get that sexy chick car, right? If you're a 65-year-old guy walking past, you're going to get the ad for the Lincoln and the big adult car, right? But they recognize this from facial recognition that was built into freaking billboard ads, right? And then, by the way, they dropped a coupon on your phone to come in and do a test drive.
Good. But this was,
Right. Well, thank you very much,
Yeah.
Brad and Steve. That was an absolutely excellent presentation. Definitely got a lot of engagement in that. And yeah, we'll definitely bring you back for
yeah.
a part two. That's
Part two when it's written.
Must do.
Okay.
Hey,
Yeah.
Bill, let me just throw in one other thing I didn't mention, the new privacy law. And if you know anybody that's interested in this, the new privacy law, the privacy law started as a consumer privacy law, and somebody raised the question and says, what about employees? Are they consumers? And the state said, oh, I hadn't thought about that. So they deferred it and deferred it. Well, now it's in law. So starting in 2023, employment data that you collect, that includes information for job applicants, current employees, contractors, retirees, you name it. And think about what you're collecting, right? You're collecting background checks, COVID tests, right? You're collecting beneficiary information, family information, all of this stuff. That is all now subject to California's privacy laws. We are doing an awareness campaign. In fact, I spoke at a conference last week with almost 1,400 attendees. We're running a privacy LC conference next week. We have 1,600 registered. This is a super hot topic. So if you know anybody in HR who's not aware of this, please, go to Privacy LC. You're welcome to join. It's free. It's on LinkedIn. Join the group. The posts are there, or just contact me and I'll be happy to send you the invite. It's free. There's no selling. It's just a community service.
Yeah. Okay.
So thanks, Bill. With that, I'll leave it with you and wish everybody, thank you very much for having us.
Yes, no, thank you, Steve, and thank you, Brad. Great presentation, one of the best we've had